This morning, I would like to speak to you and visit with you on what I consider will be the decision of this quarter century. And it's the President's proposal and Mrs. Clinton's proposal for health care. I don't believe that Americans will make any other decision in this quarter century that will be of the magnitude of that decision. And you might say, well, how could it be of that scope? Fair question. This decision will affect nearly 15% and growing of the U.S. economy, and it will federalize it. To put that in perspective, if we were to accept the proposal as is, for the first time in American history, over half our economy would be managed by the government. In other words, the United States from that point forward would be a government-driven economy instead of a private-driven economy. 10 million Americans work directly in the healthcare system. It will affect every American business, some very dramatically, some who will never even be created because of the decision. It will affect the 6 million people who will likely lose their jobs. We are dealing with a culture and institutional device that is nearly half a century old and that affects each individual in the most intimate and personal way. And the President and Mrs. Clinton have suggested that each and every decision with regard to medicine would be better made if made by the government. It envisions a board of 7 czars in Washington appointed by the President, not confirmed by the Senate. They would order each state to form alliances, government alliances. I call them collectives. So does Phil Graham. Government employees who by law could not have any background in medicine. Sort of like picture somebody getting on a 747 and the pilot standing behind you with a couple of black bags, and he says, gee, this is a pretty neat plane. I've never flown one of these. I would get off. They would decide what benefits the medical system would deliver, who could use them, and who could not. It would be a mandate. That's why I call it a collective. If you were to decide to go elsewhere for those benefits, you would be a criminal under the Act, as would the individual who served you, both subject to a $10,000 fine. The word penalty in crime occurs nearly 70 times in the Act. 1,342 pages deal with regulation. 19 deal with access. If the board concluded that a state had not fulfilled its obligation, it could unilaterally impose a tax, the first time in American history that the executive branch would house the authority to issue and subject its citizens to a tax with no ratification by the United States Congress, the governor of the given state, or the legislature. For me, that is a description of a concept that is so foreign to America, I can hardly believe we are considering it in the halls of the United States Congress. That is why I believe it will be the most significant decision we have made this quarter century. I think there are battles that each of us can remember that have been fought on other shores for which we were successful that we could have lost, and the impact would not have been near what the impact of this decision will be. Now, we are entering the era of debate, and there are alternatives emerging. The business movement away from the President's plan is comforting, but nevertheless leaves a great worry for me. In other words, the Business Roundtable has left Clinton plan, and they've endorsed the Cooper plan. This seems to be a fairly popular movement among business colleagues. But my friends, the decision is not going to be made over the Cooper plan or the President's plan or my plan or Phil Graham's or anyone else's. The decision that will be made is this: are we going to launch government management of medicine, or are we going to strengthen the private sector management of medicine? It really doesn't matter whose name is on it. Just as an aside, the Cooper plan forces 92% of American business into a government-managed plan. That's just a train going to the same station as Mrs. Clinton's, but it gets there 2 weeks later. That plan says if you are enrolled in a federally qualified plan, it's tax deductible. Otherwise, it's not. That is an enormous hammer to push Americans into government-managed medicine. On the other side of the equation, the plans of Senator Graham, McCain of Arizona, Coverdell, Nichols of Oklahoma are rooted in the belief that the current system is properly serving 8 out of 10 Americans plus. Now, coming from the business world, when I had a product that 8 out of 10 of my audience wanted, I went for it. It would never cross my mind to throw it out. Sure, I'd like to get the other 2, but I would have a winner. 8 out of 10 Americans receiving the most significant quality medical system in the history of the world. And that suggests to us that we should target the reform, that we should work towards those issues that would substantially improve what we already have. It's a little bit like all of you have experienced a leak in your roof at one time or another. It's always a crisis. It's ruining a family heirloom, the new drapes, the floor, the ceiling. It's near an electrical socket. It could really do serious damage. No one leaves a leak unattended. But have you ever known anyone that tore the house down to fix it? Make benefits more accessible and movable, portable. Attack administrative reform. It's redundant. The government's the principal culprit. It gives us 1/3 of our medical system today and 2/3 of the administrative burden. Malpractice reform. Antitrust reform, so that high-tech medicine might be shared. Involve the states. The states govern insurance in our country. They are a great laboratory for reform, and they ought to be more involved in the process and not rejected. One shoe does not fit all in this country. It's either too big for everyone or too small with the exception of one person. Utah is not Vermont, and Georgia is not New Mexico. And believe it or not, we do see things differently in this country and ought to keep it that way. If we were to do these significant reforms, we would reduce the number who might be having difficulty with the system to under 10%. We would have made the system more friendly, less costly, and significantly, we would not have required another dime of taxes, or we would not be required to remove more resources from the private sector. And while we're still arguing about the President's proposal, I don't believe anybody would suggest that the new taxes required to fund it would be greater than the tax increase we just fought over for a year. Greater. And that would be the beginning point. For the first time in American history, we would have put everyone in an entitlement. We have very significant problems with the entitlements in place today. This would be larger than all of them combined. And I would contend to you that the nation, once embarking on that road, will never be the same again. Now, the stakes are high, and the reach of this decision is far. The President and Mrs. Clinton have natural allies in the national media. They would like to describe this program in anecdotal. They would like to describe a circumstance of someone that's fallen through the cracks. They have suggested that this system is exclusionary. Only certain people can reach it or be served by it. Of course, from my judgment, 80% is a fairly significant majority. I believe the opposite is the case. I believe the current system has done more for the little guy, than any other system. Well, why would you say that? Because American medicine is inventive. It is filled with research. It has spawned every major medical breakthrough in the world in the last quarter century. I've been there. I've seen its footprints. It has helped the little man not only in America, but round the world, because it has made the uncommon common. Medical cures and procedures that 5 years ago seemed impossible are common, and the reach of those common procedures is far and wide. Ultimately, no system is perfect. And the choice we're making is, do we want to create broad mediocrity where everybody has access to an aspirin and a handful access to major medical procedures? Or do we want an innovative, creative, investment-filled system drawing high quality that from time to time has disparities? Given those two choices, there's no choice for me. You go for the latter. You go for the invention. You go for the quality, and you do everything within your power to improve it. As I said, his ally is the national media. The ally of those who believe as I do, I believe, are the American people. And if the American people understand what is at stake, what the issues are, they will reject the idea of turning medicine over to the government and expanding American government by almost 30%. They will reject it. The job for people that believe as I do will be to force the decision to be made in Omaha, Nebraska, Atlanta, Denver, Los Angeles, and all our cities across the country, and to not allow this decision to be made by the Washington wonks, by the handful of Americans in that city that think that the only way this country can do anything fairly is for the decision to be made in Washington. We have to get this decision to Main Street America. And that's why organizations such as this one are so important all across the country. On this one, you need to be engaged. You need to be involving your family, your business family, your professional groups, your community leaders in this decision. We had better understand the consequences of it, and it's going to happen probably this summer. Be engaged, continue doing what you're doing, and stay involved with this health decision. That's my message to you this morning. God bless. Thank you all for having me.
Senator Coverdell has agreed to field some questions from you all.
Yes, sir. Well, your question is a very important one, and one for which I have not seen the total answer. I would add to your analogy that the VA, I think, is a system that would not be used as a model. Neither would Medicaid nor Medicare. I just marvel at the logic of taking those as footprint models for the future, and yet that's what the Clintons have done. When you say how do you get it out there, it sort of reminds me of my wife Nancy during the campaign. Long day, you being beat up by some local newspapers, to be unnamed. And I'd come dragging in, and she'd say, "Paul, you need to tell them." I said, "From where?" I can't yell that loud. That's a frustration, I think, about many ideas in our country, because the messenger in the national media, in my judgment, just is very homogeneous with those people that agree that Washington is necessary for America to be run properly. It's very difficult if there's not an equal pulpit. Although I've been encouraged by America's ability, if given time. If you remember when the tax plan was first offered as a deficit reduction plan, the acceptance of that concept was in the 70s. When we were all finished, it was about 35%, as they learned about the details. This began at 70. As of February 10th, it's 43 and continues to fall. The only thing I know to do is to be engaged. I've said many times, battles not engaged are lost. That's why I said, make sure your family understands the consequences. That's significant. This is one worth sitting down around the table and talking about. And your associates, and your professional group, that it's engaged. If we engage our community resources and alliances, I think we can be successful. Now, there'll be any number of organizations that are formed. We are about to launch Common Sense for America, which will envision an inventory of the alliance in each of the 50 states and make sure that our natural allies understand the details of the issue and encourage them to do just that, involve their communities. And I'm convinced that if that's done, we will move these reforms to the strengthening of market forces. But I worry about this a great deal for the very reason you do. It is very difficult, given the environment we're in, to deal with this message. If somebody is going to allow decisions on this magnitude to be made on anecdotal stories, we've got a real problem. Yes, sir.
Senator, I know you're in the insurance business, in your town here. Insurance companies obviously will be adversely affected. What are they doing at a responsible level to show that the only people that they wish to insure are healthy people?
The insurance industry for many, many years was guided by risk management. By that I mean there was an enormous effort to try to insure groups for which the odds were they would have less health problems. They call that cherry picking. Today, I think we are finding more and more of a tendency for the profit to be built into administrative efficiency, and they're managing larger pools that accept greater risk. I personally believe the industry is prepared for what they perceive to be a national interest, that access be broader, and that they deal with the concept of pre-existing portability of benefits. I think there's recognition in the industry that this is a problem. I think you're going to see among the reforms pressures to alleviate the condition that people lose their benefits because of they are fallen with bad health. that there's a very difficult issue to deal with. And I do think, specifically on pre-existing conditions, that the state should be involved. I think they can help us find answers, whether it is uninsured risk pools, such as automobile insurance, whether it is a requirement that health underwriters in a given state could not disallow for pre-existing conditions. I think we're going to see that in some states. I do not believe that there is a single answer to that that emanates from a group of scholars in a gymnasium in Washington. And I can testify to the fact that that our office has been engaged in portability and access to benefits, administrative reform, malpractice reform, and antitrust reform. And it is inordinately difficult to deal with just those issues. It's a little bit like saying, look, let's a few of us get together and rewrite the national economy of Great Britain, Denmark, and Sweden. That's how large this is. And one of the first edicts, if you're going to study medicine, is first do no harm. And I think that would be a good lesson for Washington. I don't know all the answers, and nor does anyone else, as to how to get to some of these imperfections. I do know the result of having government pretend that it can manage them all. And so this is a critical problem. Greater accessibility is something desired by all, and I think it's achievable in the marketplace. And I think the industry is prepared to accept it from everything I've seen and heard. Yes, sir.
You mentioned about this being the most important decision in the next 25 years. In NAFTA, it seemed like there was some degree of nonpartisanship in the Congress. Do you feel that the Congress will approach this in a nonpartisan way to such a serious decision as this?
I think for the most part, this will be more bipartisan than the tax battle was. The tax battle was very partisan. I think this one, you've got people already on both sides. I think Cooper has almost as many Republicans who have signed that bill as have Democrats. In the final analysis, there'll be a philosophical split. Market forces are going to have more Republicans behind it than Democrats. And government management is going to have more Democrats than Republicans. But nevertheless, there's a segment of both parties at play on this issue. And I think it will be driven by the philosophy of it, more than the politics of it. We're a political system, and every decision has a political ramification. The president wants to go into the '94 election saying, I've solved it. I'm prepared to let him have that so long as it isn't, I've made us a government economy. And I believe most of my colleagues on my side of the aisle are prepared to not get in the way of reform, but they are not prepared to give the country to a new theory of management. Yes, sir.
Mr. Coverdell, I'm Martin Keller, and I totally agree with the absolute scariness of this national health care plan we're talking about. But for that to come up, there are certain things in society that spawn this sort of thing. And the thing that I guess only spend a few weeks in the hospital. And what can we do to address that?
Well, you're correct. There's a fear about the consequences of medicine. I wish I had a chart behind me here, but medical costs in the United States tracked growth in the United States until 1965. From our beginning until 1965. What happened in 1965? The government got into medicine. And from 1965 to 1994, it has tripled the growth. It has a lot to do with the fact that we created two massive entitlements. And once you create such, it's just like I was reading about the West German plan, and the commentator, who's a West German, said when they created the government plan, they created a system of medical grazing, overutilization. And we have very large components for which there's no natural check, and costs have spiraled. The second reason costs have increased significantly is that we as a culture demand so much from it. And this is something we as Americans have not come to terms with. And the President suggests that the way we do that is we have the government tell us what we can and cannot do in medicine. And I'm saying we need to make that decision as a people. But we are very demanding of a medical system. First, as the costs have increased, companies have begun to pay far more attention to their medical costs. For many, many years, they paid no attention to it at all. It was an asterisk. Once the financial controller began to see the impact on the company, they've begun to pay more attention, and the market force of that is beginning to change. We as a people are doing things differently to hold the cost down. We as companies are doing things differently, and that's having a positive effect. You could argue, I think, that if the government did nothing, you would begin to see positive effects in the marketplace. Second, I think we, in partnership, not as a dictator, need to create incentives for individual responsibility in the medical system. We've been removing that, where there was somebody else took care of it all. You're talking about, the gentleman over here was talking about insurance. Years and years ago, there were substantial deductibles that you were responsible for, and then the industry began competing against each other by removing the deductible. Well, there has to be, right here we have a great example of Grady Hospital that has begun a system of charging, even if it's a little bit. And they have made that system far more efficient today than it was when I was having to deal with it. I don't, like over here on the insurance, I don't know anyone that knows, as we look around the world, medical costs have become a very large component of all of the industrialized West. And I think a lot of it is demand, and a lot of it is we've moved to systems where there's no personal accountability. I don't know what to do about the demand. I think maybe people have to make that decision, how much of that they want to buy, like cars or anything else. But I think the personal responsibility we can help with. And I don't think it can be done overnight. If you dig a hole for 30 years, you can't fill it up in 12 months. Yes, sir.
I refer to the message that came from the doctor in the fact that if we are going to succeed in killing the program coming from the White House, I think we have to admit also that in our system as it is today, there are certain weaknesses, and we have to look for correcting it. And let me give you an example. You talked about insurance, I'll tell you about something else. We made a market research, a study, because we are helping companies to come to Georgia. And they come with family. And when they arrive here, they look for a family doctor. We made a study to find out what's going wrong there. And we found out 29.5% of the doctors in Georgia, as soon as they know they are medical care, they won't accept you.
Now let's repeat that again. I didn't hear that.
If a husband or wife, when they arrive here, they are new. They are looking for a doctor that will take care of their family. They pick up the phone and they call. And the receptionist in the office of the doctor turns, and the first question she'll ask, are you on Medicare? And if she's not, she regrets it, the doctor is too busy. Well, that has to be corrected. We have to behave so that we can stop the misery that we are going to face in the future. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, the point you're making is that there are imperfections in the system, and there are abuses in the system, and the abuses are shared in each segment of it. We all know that. The question is, and I see this over and over in Washington, the question is, can we as a people resolve these questions in our communities, in the states, or is the only way that we can correct a problem to turn it over to a centralized federal government? Can American employers treat their employees fairly? Or does the government have to tell them how to be fair? Can American citizens make decisions for themselves? Or does everything have to be told and planned for them? Do we make mistakes? Have we made mistakes? Of course. I happen to be one that believes that our belief in the American citizen, our belief in the American family, our belief in the American business community was right. That we have produced a good country. That charity really emanates in the home and in the community and cannot be structured by a federal government that imposes it. We are a good people. We've been good world neighbors. We've been good community neighbors. And I believe that we should adhere to our belief in the citizen, the family, and community, and not take that away. Thank you very, very much.